Deus Ex Human Revolution was a game with a massive responsibility. It was released 8 years after Invisible War, and had the job of bringing the series back to life. Not only that, but it needed to bring Deus Ex back to what made it a game that revolutionized the industry. Not only did it need to resurrect the series, but it needed to do it very well. In my opinion, Human Revolution succeeds at this task. I do think it's a vastly different game from the first in the series, but it brings back a lot of what I loved about the original game. It certainly has its flaws, though, which we will definitely be talking about. But overall, the story is one filled with intrigue, conspiracy, and moral questions. The gameplay reflects the beginning of Deus Ex, multiple avenues of approach for every mission and situation. The new systems that are introduced are useful, fun, and provide us with many more options of play, which is what this series is all about. Human Revolution does it right, and in my opinion is more of an example of the next generation of what Deus Ex started. This is what the modern immersive sim looks like, and Human Revolution fits in with that crowd incredibly well. Today, we'll be taking an in-depth look at Deus Ex Human Revolution. We'll be talking about gameplay, mechanics, story, and everything in between. If you haven't seen my previous videos on the Deus Ex series, you should probably go check those out now. Spoilers for everything Deus Ex Human Revolution, and some spoilers for Deus Ex and Deus Ex Invisible War. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I want to talk about Deus Ex Human Revolution. Human Revolution had a long history of development. Before we can talk about the game that would become Human Revolution, we need to talk about Deus Ex 3. After Deus Ex Invisible War was released, the climate at Ion Storm wasn't exactly the best. Most people revered their time there, but Jordan Thomas, a designer at Ion Storm, had described it as an auteur cult built around specific personalities. The team was moving forward with 2 projects simultaneously. Deus Ex Insurrection was the first. In the early stages of development, this would be the 3rd game in the Deus Ex series. Many people had different ideas for it, moving it into the future, using the Invisible War engine, and attempting to correct the mistakes made by the previous entry. There were also some ideas thrown around to make the 3rd game based on a foster family, recruiting teammates and stopping each mission back at a home base. Art Min was brought on to lead the project and eventually had final say in what it would be. Min worked for Looking Glass Studios, briefly helping out on System Shock before moving to Valve. His stint there was also brief, before coming to Ion Storm to help out with the release of Invisible War and lead Insurrection. Min eventually settled on a game set in the past, before Deus Ex. The team also wanted to return to the roots of the series and bring it back to Earth a little bit. Before the project could even be realized, though, Ion Storm began to crumble. The studio wasn't making very much money, most of their projects hadn't been profitable, and John Romero had already left. Then Warren Spector left, and shortly after that, Art Min himself left. While Insurrection was being developed and abandoned, Jordan Thomas had begun to work on Deus Ex 3, another Deus Ex 3, simultaneously. The game would have been set before Deus Ex as well, and would see you playing the father or original clone of J.C. Denton. The game was to have unique missions based on the way that you played the game, a project with generative storytelling. This would obviously never come to fruition either, though, because Ion Storm was shut down before any of this could happen. Eidos had retained the rights to the series, and in 2007, Eidos Montreal was established. Here, they began concept development on what would become the next game in the series, Deus Ex Human Revolution. They wanted to shoot for the stars and go for something ambitious. The team started by playing the first 2 games in the series and making sure to note what they liked and what they didn't like about the games. It was important to the team that they get this right, especially since they were all new to the series. Square Enix, the company that owned Eidos Montreal, had given them free usage of the Crystal engine, which was developed for the Tomb Raider reboot. The team took tons of inspiration from other games for Human Revolution. Their cover system took from Rainbow Six Vegas, their AI took from Fear, their regenerating health from the Call of Duty games, their inventory system, game economy, and context-sensitive actions from Resident Evil 4, alert system from Metal Gear Solid, and even the organic feel of stealth from Escape from Butcher Bay. The team's biggest value was to maintain what Deus Ex meant at its core. To the team, this meant that every choice had a consequence, both good and bad. The story was written by Mary DeMarle, who had worked on some of the Myst sequels, Dungeon Siege 2, and Splinter Cell Conviction. The story itself was supposed to mirror the tale of Icarus, flying too close to the sun. A large challenge that she faced was creating a defined main character, even though the player would choose what they would say or how they would approach situations. DeMarle also had trouble dealing with the conversation boss fights, which were a new addition to the series. Having so many variables and variety in the way that these encounters could be approached meant a lot had to be considered. The first teaser trailer for Human Revolution was released on November 26, 2007. The game itself released on PC and consoles on August 23, 2011. A quick note before we get into things. There are two distinct versions of Deus Ex Human Revolution. The first released was the original version of the game. The second was released on October 22nd, 2013. It was called the Director's Cut and changed multiple things. It altered the graphics, removed the yellow filter on the game, rehauled the boss fights, and included many hours of developer commentary as well as a making-of video. Most of these things were meant to address things that fans had issues with or the developers themselves meant to change. One of the biggest things that this version of the game does is integrate all of the released DLC into the game. This is just about the only issue that I have with this version of the game, and I'll talk about it when we get there. The issue doesn't really show up until you're just about done with your first playthrough, but it's pretty glaring. You're probably wondering why I didn't play the base version of the game, but that's because the Director's Cut is the only version of the game that's digitally available on storefronts. The base game can only be bought physically, so for all intents and purposes, this is the base version of the game now. I did also run into some frame-dropping issues with this version of the game, which is mostly due to the fact that Nixxes, the company originally responsible for porting the base game to PC, did not port the Director's Cut to PC. It's not game-breaking, but was very annoying in some areas. It's still definitely the best-performing game, though, in the series so far. Deus Ex Human Revolution starts quite a lot like the first game in the series. We see a shadowy cabal that's controlling information and conspiring against the public. The anonymous individuals are concerned about someone named David Seraph revealing information to the people of the world. Riots and protests have begun against the altering of the human body's abilities. Human Revolution actually takes place in 2027, well before the events of the first Deus Ex. Mechanical augmentation has just become a part of people's daily lives, replacing limbs to push humanity past their normal abilities. Some people don't like this and are putting up a vigorous fight against it. Seraph Industries is set to reveal a new technology tomorrow, and people are worried it's something that will alter humanity even further. This is where we come in. Our new main character is named Adam Jensen, and he works for Seraph as the head of security. Megan Reed is Jensen's significant other, and she's the one that discovered this mystery new tech that's being revealed tomorrow. We head with Megan as we, the player, get our first tour of Seraph Industries. A lot of information is delivered to us here, mostly the type of things going on at the company, the breakthroughs in science and technology that they're making. We also learn more about the characters as well. Megan is more focused on using technology to help people. teachers, doctors, construction workers, the average person. But that's not really what Seraph does. The company mostly works with the military, dealing in weapons and super soldiers. She tries to convince us, and herself, that this isn't the case, but judging by the advanced super weapons we're being shown, it is. We run into Pritchard on the elevator. He's the head of cybersecurity at Seraph. He and Jensen don't exactly have the greatest relationship, constantly picking at each other due to some sort of security man pissing contest. We meet David Seraph, the man himself, inside of his massive office. Seraph wants to get Hugh Darrow to show up at the hearings tomorrow. Darrow has a good opinion with Congress, and it'll make Seraph look better to the government. Darrow had a huge effect on the world himself, developing the mechanical augmentations that so many use today. He also inspired David to create Seraph Industries. While Adam and David talk, red flashing lights and alarm sirens begin to ring. An environmental malfunction has been detected, and it's up to Adam to go check it out. This is where we're actually allowed to play, and we're introduced to most of the systems of Human Revolution. This entry is mostly a massive change to the status quo that we understood for the series, if there ever could even be such a thing. Both games that we played previously were very similar at their core, but as soon as you branched out from the hot magma, you found a crust that was incredibly different. Human Revolution is the same. The things that we know and love about the series are still here. We approach missions and combat situations in generally whatever way we want, or whatever way we can at the time. If we want to sneak, then we take paths over roofs and through vents to maneuver our way to our objective, become the epitome of stealth and the image of the shadows. But if we don't want to waste time and we'd like to take everyone out with us, then we can blast indoors, toss grenades, blow people up, shoot heads, and become the epitome of chaos, the image of the sun. Of course, as per usual, the crux of Deus Ex is still here. It isn't just about these two approaches, it's about whatever you want it to be, or what you need it to be at the time. Maybe you're out of ammo for your silenced weapons, and there's too many enemies to take out effectively, and maybe you get spotted really quick. Well, your stealth level just turned into open firearm combat. If these things are all the same, then what does Human Revolution introduce that's new? Well, one of the biggest changes is this game's cover system. Like I said before, the team took a lot of inspiration from Rainbow Six Vegas for their cover system. Looking at the two games, they function pretty similar when it comes to hiding behind objects. We can hold the right mouse button down for those on PC and go into third-person mode to take refuge behind a pillar, wall, or any other sporadically placed piece of equipment. Here we can blind fire, pop up to aim, jump to another piece of cover, or slide along it. For the most part, the system works pretty well and even introduces a new level of gameplay. Getting good at quickly popping out of cover to bang a headshot with your pistol before popping back down takes time. Using the cover system to get more information on where your enemies are at before heading through a stealth section is also a new level of depth that's been added. It may seem like these things are small, but once cover becomes an integral part of your playthrough, you realize that it's not so tiny after all. Design also has to be catered to this element. You can't just ignore it, place the same objects or style environments the same when the player has the ability to see in third person from cover. It's a great new dimension to the game that slightly modernizes it without taking out the feel that the original gameplay loop had. The other big change that Human Revolution makes lies in its augmentation system. Augmentations have been completely overhauled and are much more different to either of the entries that we played before. Now we don't have to choose between any aug, we can have them all if we'd like. The new system is a pretty basic level up system. We get experience for defeating enemies, completing missions, discovering hidden parts of maps or the world, and other various tasks. This XP will eventually give us a praxis point that we can use to unlock a new ability or access new parts of already unlocked abilities. This reflects the more modern skill tree systems that we're used to seeing. The sheer variety that this system holds, though, is fantastic. We can get abilities that let us break our fall, we can see through walls, we can get better readouts on enemy movements to help with stealth, we can take less damage from bullets, jump higher, take out more targets from stealth. There's a lot here, and it feels great that a lot of these have become passives. I didn't mind the crazy chaotic nature of the augments in the original Deus Ex. Having to turn them on and off and manage power was pretty great, mostly because we could combine a lot of augments and do some wild stuff with it. Here, most everything is passive and has been turned down a notch. We can't do anything ridiculous like auto-healing forever through all damage, but with so many different augments, we get a lot of different ways to go about our missions. This level of variety makes it feel like no two playthroughs will be the same, like my game was made for me and yours for you. A special tailored product to the individual rather than a shared experience. This does bring one downside, though, in that Human Revolution slightly feels like we're working more within the bounds of a simulation. It does feel like we're playing a video game, and it doesn't give us many ways to break that. Of course, there are things here that we can do that we weren't supposed to, but the first game felt more like the walls that kept us in place were mere centimeters thick rather than inches. A small difference, but one that should be noted considering the modernization of the series moving forward. I don't think this is necessarily a fault either, just better technology and more rigid game design. Hacking has been adjusted quite a bit now as well. Where before it was a simple button press with a timer, it's now a whole mini-game of its own. We have to control specific nodes to carve out a path to a central node that will complete the hack. This will allow us to access the keycode panel, security control, or personal computer we're trying to force our way into. Along the way, we can hack special nodes that will give us extra rewards. We can also fortify nodes to strengthen them against the approaching defense system that will inevitably get called against us once we're seen. With every ability used on a node, we have a chance to be seen by the system. This will begin a countdown, and if we don't complete the hack before the countdown is done, we're kicked out. There's really not a lot of consequence here, though, because if we fail, we're just locked out for 30 seconds and we get to try again. It's kind of odd that there's such little consequence. Making us wait seems like it's more of a real-world reason to not lose rather than an in-game one. Physically punishing the player rather than both the avatar and the one controlling it. I don't mind the hacking overall, and it's probably a better alternative to just pressing a button and waiting for the operation to complete, but boy do we have to do it a lot. There are tons and tons of computers in this game, ones that just have emails we can access either for flavor text or valuable codes that we might need later. We'll also be hacking safes to get more provisions, panels to get us into doors, security computers to turn off turrets and switch robots against the enemy. Most of these things have real codes that we can find to activate the systems anyways, but the availability and ease of hacking kind of de-incentivizes us from actively seeking these codes out. Also, hacking is pretty simple. It doesn't take very many levels before we're powerful enough in hacking to not really worry about it very much. In the beginning of the game, it seems like more of a decision we should make. To hack or not to hack is only the question for a brief period, before it becomes how long is this hack going to take me and how many nuke viruses am I going to use. It's a decent system, but it doesn't seem to fit in with the theme of wanting players to choose their approach. It seems a lot more like the game wants to choose the approach for us. There's also some smaller alterations, like stealth takedowns actually having an animation and system behind them, rather than us just hitting guys in the ass with a baton. But if you haven't noticed yet, this is clearly the highest fidelity Deus Ex we've received. Obviously it would be, it came out nearly 11 years after the first game in the series. The game looks great graphically, though it's a bit outdated by today's standards. There is quite a bit of change aesthetically. The game has this sort of yellow-gold futurist sci-fi vibe. It's not exactly that close to what we normally expect from something cyberpunk, but being a prequel to the original series, I enjoy the fact that the newer games decided to branch out and create their own specific brand rather than try and copy the games that came before them. It also flows better with the story of the games. It makes us feel like we're in a new era, that the Deus Ex that we've seen before is in the future and is a veritable dark age, whereas now there are at least things to have and hold on to. This is a time before governments have explicitly created viruses and spread them out across the population en masse right in the open. This is a time when secret organizations were still operating in secret and trying to move from the shadows. There are some Deus Ex purists who weren't too fond of this style change, and I can definitely see where they're coming from. I mean, I gushed about the aesthetic of the first game for quite a while in my video. It's this wonderful neo-punk kind of thing that really can't be named. It feels very genuine and honest, but truth be told, I don't know if I'd really like the idea of anyone trying to recreate that. That's not what Human Revolution tried to do. It tried to go in its own direction, aesthetically, stylistically, and thematically, while retaining the core tenets that made Deus Ex Deus Ex. Back in the beginning section of the game, Jensen realizes that something is afoot when he sees people raiding Seraph Industries. He makes his way through the building, but eventually he's attacked by some mechanically augmented mercenaries, and Megan is kidnapped. It seems like Jensen is killed, but after an opening cutscene, it's revealed that Seraph saved him. 6 months have passed, and Jensen has been brought back to life through the miracle of some heavy mechanical augmentations. Adam didn't exactly agree to this, but it was in his employment contract that Seraph was allowed to take these kinds of actions. We'll talk about this more in a bit because it's a large part of Jensen's character and one of my favorite themes of the game. Jensen has to have his augments calibrated with Pritchard before heading out on another mission after immediately returning to work. There's already been another attack on Seraph Manufacturing, and we have to go save some hostages. Our main objective, though, is to secure the Typhoon explosive system, the one we saw being used in the introduction to the game. The terrorists at the plant are looking to try and take it for their own use. This is our first real mission of the game, one where we can choose our path through the environments laid out for us. One thing that Human Revolution brings back from the original Deus Ex is that feeling of exploration and a sort of larger-than-life space that we're maneuvering through. When given an objective, we might feel like we're pressed for time to save hostages, to disable equipment, or to stop the bad guys, so we might do a little exploring. But on first pass, we most likely won't search every nook and cranny. This can leave you feeling like there are hundreds of little areas left to explore, things we missed everywhere, special routes that we could have taken if we went in loud or if we went in quiet. We already talked about the fact that Human Revolution has a lot of variety, which holds true to the series, but Human Revolution also has the feeling and appearance of variety, which is almost as important as variety itself. Sometimes the illusion is more impressive than the actors on the stage. Our secondary objective in the plant is to rescue some hostages. One thing to point out here is that if we take too long exploring the headquarters in the previous section, the hostages will be dead before we even start this mission. We have 15 minutes, but the game doesn't really tell us this. It's an interesting piece of the game because it just happens and we have to deal with it, either missing this content and getting it on a replay or not even knowing we could miss it. The group that has attacked the plant is called Purity First. They're an anti-augmentation group. They claim that augments will cause people to do terrible things, that they are not human. When Jensen finds the Typhoon weapon, a hacker is trying to steal the blueprints. This hacker takes his own life seemingly against his will. When we confront the leader of Purity First, Zeke Sanders, we get our first conversation boss battle. These battles are a fantastic new addition to the game, and there's 2 types that I consider battles in the game. The first is a simple choice system. Here we can choose how to respond to prompts, and based on our choices, we'll get one of multiple endings to a conversation. Here we can let Zeke go, subdue him, or kill him. Some of these will see his hostage living, and some will see her dying. The more complicated version of these battles are the persuasion conversations. Here we can see a persuasion meter that will show us how close we are to swaying the person to our side. Either friend or foe, the other individual will have personality ratings that can determine how we should deal with them. We can also get an augment to help us out here. This aug will analyze their personality and give us hints on how to respond. I really like this whole system because I genuinely felt pressured when responding to people, but also it held weight. It actually mattered. The more time I took to respond and choose words that actually did what I wanted them to, the more results I saw. When I chose wantonly, I would see the consequences. The system doesn't feel like wandering in the dark, grasping at straws. It genuinely feels like if you focus enough and pay attention to the conversation, the right response will present itself. It isn't easy, but it isn't so unfair that it feels random. Zeke eventually reveals that he didn't know the hacker. It wasn't one of his people. This leads Jensen to think that Zeke was being manipulated into raiding the facility for someone else's needs. When we head back to headquarters, we turn in the Typhoon system to Pritchard, but he's scanning Seraph's network for breaks in the system. Purity first hacked in somehow, and he needs to figure out where. We talk to Seraph in his office, who tells us that the Detroit police are holding the hacker's body at the station. Seraph is one of my favorite characters in the game. This is mostly because of the emotion that the performance and writing pull out of the player, or at least me. From the beginning of the game, we play a character that is constantly fucking up. We failed in the first attack on Seraph Industries, the second attack didn't go great, the hacker died, and in my playthrough I let Zeke go. Seraph isn't really happy with our performance, and he constantly voices this. But Stephen Shellen, the actor that plays Seraph, doesn't deliver this performance in a power figure, angry and wanting results sort of way. His performance has much more depth. Just through his line delivery and dialogue, we can feel that he's disappointed, but that he wants more from Adam.
Yeah, about Sanders. What the hell were you thinking? Letting him slip away like that? I sent you in there to take care of things.
He doesn't want to be mean to Adam. He doesn't want to yell at him. This representation of a disappointed boss works so incredibly well and just feels so genuine. You almost feel bad for disappointing him. Couple this with the fact that we're playing a Deus Ex game where we kind of just assume that Seraph is going to turn into a bad guy at some point, and you have a character with intense focus and many layers to be deconstructed throughout the course of the story. Getting back into our office for the first time, we are given our first side mission, or secondary objective. There are plenty of these throughout the course of the game. They're an evolution of the secondary objectives from previous entries. These now function more like traditional side quests that we'd see in modern games. For the most part, this optional content is really good, usually pretty lengthy missions with a decent amount of variety and choice of approach. Some of the missions also hold quite a bit of information about our story or characters in general. Skipping these means missing out on either interesting scenarios crafted by the team or really important information. For example, the first mission we receive is Lesser Evils. We talk to Tim Corella, who works at Seraph Industries. He's been helping steal neuropazine from the business with Brian Tyndall. Corella wants out, but Tyndall is blackmailing him with security cam footage. We find Tyndall's apartment, which is promptly attacked by a junkie looking for neuropazine. When we find Tyndall, he tells us that he was distributing the drug to people who needed it. Neuropazine is a drug that augmented individuals use to prevent their system from rejecting the mechanics. Tyndall was giving the drug to people who were forcibly augmented, something that Jensen already has experience with. We can help out Tyndall by taking out some dealers that he's in deep with, or we can just kill him. Either way, we can get the footage back and help out Corella in the end. This mission does multiple things for the game and the story, though. It contextualizes the world around us. The neuropazine epidemic paints a bleak picture of the world, of people forced into augmentation and then swung into an addiction that they can't control. These dealers, at least the ones we know, are just trying to help, but the only way that they can help is enabling an addiction that was forcibly pressed onto someone else. On top of that, Jensen has also been forcibly augmented. He never wanted this, and it comes up quite often in our dialogue choices. Jensen can express some great distaste for being forcibly augmented. Another side quest called Motherly Ties deals with Megan Reed's mother wanting closure on her death. She thinks that the attack on Seraph Industries was more nefarious than the official reports say. We have to seek out Megan's autopsy reports and other information regarding her death. We eventually realize that there was a cover-up and something fishy is going on. Megan's death is a huge part of Jensen's character and even has a huge part in the beginning of the game. Both of these side quests can be missed entirely. We don't have to do them, and they aren't the biggest part of the story, but they're incredibly interesting pieces of content that aren't just filler. They feel like half pieces of the story. We don't need them to understand what's happening, but if we want more, it's available to us. The only real complaint I have about the side content is probably a complaint with the entire quest system overall. In the first two games, it was up to us to figure out how to complete quests and objectives in the game. This obviously incentivizes exploration and out-of-the-box solutions to solve the problems at hand. This goes hand in hand with the rest of the game and its general theme of player choice, the bounds of the simulation not really existing. In Human Revolution, we have big, fat waypoints on the screen that tell us where to go constantly. It doesn't really work within the world of the game, and it also doesn't really work for staying true to this immersive sim that we're playing. It's something that can be turned off in the menus, but when criticizing the default game, it's something that needs to be talked about. In the main story, we have to head to the police station to try and get access to the body of the hacker from the attack. Here, we can convince one of the guards to let us into the morgue. He used to be on the SWAT team with Jensen before the two of them encountered an augmented teenager, and Jensen refused to kill him, so Wayne Haas did it. Jensen was relieved from the force, and Haas took his spot. He's been dealing with the PTSD from this ever since. Jensen's backstory is slowly revealed over the course of the game. It isn't something that we see overtly talked about, just small references made in documents, emails, and conversations with others. It's something we can piece together ourselves. It gives the world and our character a sense of realism. We don't have people constantly spitting things about our character's past, only when it's appropriate. We find out that the neural hub of the hacker is a very important piece of information to the US government. It's been given ultraviolet classification, meaning no one is to look at the contents. We can also find information on the cover-ups into both attacks on Seraph's facilities, all spearheaded by a man named Joseph Manderley, who you'll recognize if you've played the first game. We have to take the neural hub to Jensen's apartment. Here, Pritchard analyzes the equipment and finds out that it was designed to turn a human into a proxy. This means that someone was hacking the blueprints through Yune, not Yune themselves. They were being controlled by another individual who hid their tracks. Pritchard figures out that the hole in Seraph's cybersecurity is coming from a signal in Derelict Row. There's a transmitter that's been keeping a back door open for a while now. While we're here, we can take a look at Jensen's apartment. It's another incredibly interesting display of environmental storytelling, albeit slightly more overt than what we saw in Deus Ex. Jensen's character seems to display more similar qualities to someone like Paul Denton rather than JC. He's smashed his mirror in multiple times, seemingly not used to or wanting these augmentations that he's received. His apartment is a mess covered in guns, schematics, and equipment. He has a hidden panel behind a wall that he can access for lots of extra equipment. Infiltrating the facility, we find out that it was used by the Tyrants, an organization that attacked Seraph Industries. It was also used by the hacker that was trying to access the Typhoon. The Tyrants, the three augmented individuals that attacked Adam and Megan 6 months ago, are here. We have to fight off Barrett in our first boss battle of the game. These were a highly contentious part of the game when it was released. People really didn't enjoy them as there weren't ways to approach these fights from a stealth aspect. These boss battles were actually outsourced to another developer called Grip Entertainment. The boss battles were changed in the director's cut version of the game to have more options for all playstyles. I don't really mind the boss battles that much. It's not a large change from the previous games. The first game had boss battles, they just weren't as segmented as the sections in this game are. Barrett is pretty easy to take down, and once we do, he tries to take us with him. He does tell us that we need to go to Hengsha, China, to find what we're looking for. When we get back to the headquarters, Pritchard tells us that the back door in the firewall was set up by Seraph himself. He was streaming information through it quite a bit before Jensen was hired. Seraph tells us that he had an investigator look into Jensen's past. Apparently, he was a product of genetic modification at a lab called White Helix. Eventually, he gives us a passport so that we can head to China. Human Revolution's story is pretty good for the most part. It definitely takes a different fork in the road from the previous entries. If Invisible War went the other direction in terms of sci-fi and high-tech aesthetics, and Deus Ex was somewhere in the middle, Human Revolution is on the other end of the ground. I do think that it's good and was most likely the best choice for the developer to give this new leg of the series its own style. But one of the things that I like the least is that most of the conspiracy stuff has been removed from the game entirely. In the first game, we would often hear real conspiracy theories name-dropped constantly. The Bilderbergs, the Trilateral Commission, Area 51, the Rothschilds. It was steeped in the real world, which made Deus Ex in itself feel real. Human Revolution removes most of this. There are sparse references to these things through a radio host named Lazarus. This radio host is mostly played as a parody, though, to modern-day entertainers who ramble and shout about frogs, demon politicians, and other things that I can't say or YouTube will demonetize me. This reduces that real-life conspiracy influence to sort of a joke, though, which I think ignores a large part of the Deus Ex aesthetic that made the game special. Its roots in the real world made the game more tangible, like you could feel it run through your fingers. Removing this and essentially turning it into a joke that references real-world people is kind of odd. There's also the fact that a lot of this comes true in Deus Ex. So essentially, this guy was a real, legitimate doomsayer that was just mostly being ignored. When we get to Hengsha, we have to infiltrate the apartment building that was home to Windmill, the hacker that was controlling the other hacker that we saw die. He's not here, though, and Bell Tower Associates, a private military company, has already beat us there. We can head to a local nightclub called The Hive and look for the owner, a man named Tong Si-hung. After doing some convincing, he eventually tells us that Bruggen is in the Alice Garden pods. Bruggen tells us he was hired by Zhao Yunru, the CEO of Taiyang Medical. Zhao got Bruggen to participate in the attack on Seraph Industries. Bruggen wants us to clear his name as Zhao is trying to have him killed since he's a loose end. He wants us to get into Taiyang Medical and get the security footage that's been used to blackmail him. He gives us a keycard and bell tower guards storm the place. Inside Taiyang, we find out that the attack on Seraph was only initiated to try and kidnap Megan and her team. When we confront Zhao, she manipulates Adam into thinking that she's being controlled and gets away. The security footage we found before implicates Eliza Kassan, a news anchor for Picus Communications. When we arrive at Picus, everyone is gone except for Eliza. We realize quickly it's a trap and the building is stormed. We can make our way through the facility and find Eliza, who is actually an artificial intelligence that controls media and information. She tries to give us more info, but she's being controlled by one of the tyrants, Yelena Fedorova. We have another boss battle, a particularly annoying one. We defeat the woman and Eliza gives us a new lead, Isaias Sandoval. He was supposed to disable the scientists' GPL trackers so it would seem like they were dead. When we get back to Detroit, people are rioting in the streets. They're protesting the tech that allows humans to be enhanced. We meet Seraph in Jensen's apartment, who tells us to head to the Detroit Convention Center. There, William Taggart is giving a speech. Taggart is an activist who is very anti-augmentation. His right-hand man happens to be Sandoval. We have to convince Taggart to give us Sandoval's location or take it from him. Eventually, we track down Sandoval, who's hiding out underground. He realizes that Taggart has thrown him under the bus, placing the blame on him for the riots. He decides to take his own life, which we can talk him down from. He eventually tells us that the scientists still have their implants, but their frequencies were just changed. Hugh Darrow is back at Seraph HQ. He talks about multiple things quickly, including augmentation regulation and a project called Panchaea, meant to help curb global warming. Seraph tells us that Savchenko, one of the captured scientists, has been tracked to Hengsha, so we head back to China. As we arrive back in, though, our ship is shot down, and Malik is killed in the process. Belltower is hunting down Jensen at this point. We also have to head over to Lim to have our biochip replaced, as there's a new malfunction causing them to glitch out. When we track down the signal, we find it at the hideout of the Harvesters, a gang that captures people and takes out their augs. They either sell these or use them for themselves. We find Tong with Savchenko's arm. He said that the body was sold to them by Belltower. We have to track down Tong's son, who happens to be Tracer Tong, the very same one that would be instrumental in the events of Deus Ex and Invisible War. Tong gives us a bomb to blow up Belltower's ships. After doing this, we should be able to get in a pod and escape. Now, this is just about the end of the game, or rather, very close to the end. We only have a couple more missions before the finale, but the director's cut changes this. The One Story DLC that was released for Human Revolution is inserted here. In the original game, it would jump ahead 3 days, Jensen having been missing during that time. The DLC patches this hole, and the director's cut makes this DLC mandatory. Now, extra content is normally a good thing when we can choose to experience it, but we can't with The Missing Link. We're forced to play it, and this wouldn't be bad if it didn't entirely mess up the pacing of the game's narrative. The DLC itself really isn't that bad and has its own interesting themes and characters. There's some nice twists and turns here, as well as some interesting areas, but placing it right before the finale of the game just slows everything down. The DLC really does feel like an isolated incident, but trailing off on this incident for a few hours and then getting back to the finale of the game is kind of ridiculous. During the DLC, Jensen wakes up on a ship, captured by Natanya Keitner. She thinks Jensen is a spy and is torturing him. We quickly find out that she's actually a double agent. She wants Adam to help her find evidence to incriminate Belltower. A man named Burke seems to be running the place, forcing scientists to do hidden research. Gary Savage happens to be one of those scientists, a man we would meet as J.C. Denton in the first Deus Ex game. Eventually, Kavanaugh decides to turn whistleblower. Keitner gets killed, and we have a decision to make. We can save Kavanaugh so that she can present evidence and maybe take down Belltower, or save the prisoners being held there. This is obviously quite the moral dilemma, a classic example of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. You can also just destroy the gas dispenser nearby, though, and save both of them. We eventually fight Burke, and we're taken back to our sleep pod by a man named Quinn, a powerful secret agent working for someone named Janice. One of the absolute worst things about this DLC is that it gives us access to this big ship that we have to travel back and forth across. The only thing stopping us from doing this easily is that there are checkpoints all over it that we constantly have to stop into to be scanned for security. These serve as sort of loading screens, but they're so long and constant. It's incredibly annoying and makes everything take even longer. Once we're done with that detour, we can continue with the main story. We arrive in Singapore at Omega Ranch, a research facility. We have to find the 3 scientists here and piece together some information. The first thing we can do is create a distraction, using the scientists to try and get further into the facility and find Megan. We can also find out that the Illuminati have been working on a kill switch, activating all of the biochips for augmented people so that they can be controlled. Zhao does this to us when we confront her, and we have to fight Namir, the 3rd boss battle. Now, obviously, if we didn't take the biochip replacement earlier, then we won't be able to be controlled here, and we can fight with a clear, distractionless UI. We find Megan, who was still alive. She tells Adam that Omega Ranch is owned by Hugh Darrow. On top of that, she's been working with Darrow in a classic "it's not as simple as you think" scenario. Megan stole Adam's DNA, which her research is completely based on. We then see Darrow giving a press conference where he activates everyone's new biochips to turn them into aggressive zombies. We have one final mission, heading to Panchaea, the massive geoengineering facility. Darrow has completely turned. He originally created augments to help the less fortunate. Now he realizes that his creation is being used to control the populace. He can't have that anymore, and that's why he decided to set off the receiver. He figures if the regulators realize what a Achilles tendon the augments are, they'll be banned for good. On our way to the core of the facility, we can meet Taggart and Seraph. This mirrors the first Deus Ex game, both people giving us a sort of path to follow when we have to inevitably pick our ending. At the core, we encounter Zhao. She merges with Hyron, a massive supercomputer. It's the most advanced computer system in the entire world. Before we talk about the ending, I do want to talk about the incredible and interesting aesthetic of Human Revolution. The design and art style that was chosen for this game can be just beautiful at certain points. It isn't always served by the tech of the game itself, but it's a really interesting design overall. Vermeer and Rembrandt were quoted as being references for the color scheme for the game. The entire visual style was based on Renaissance artwork in general. The black and gold designs play yin and yang for each other, black representing the modern dystopia we find ourselves in, and the gold representing humanity's hope for the future. It's clear that the art team had a very distinct vision for what they wanted the game to look like. Not only that, but they wanted to tell the game's story visually, not only through the scenes of the game, but the environments, colors, textures, and backgrounds. This is even reflected in the trailer for the game that mirrors Renaissance paintings and the Icarus myth itself. Even Adam Jensen sitting on this chair smoking a cigarette is posed just like a classic portrait. You'll also notice that characters who support augmentation are generally dressed in outfits that are reminiscent of the classic Italian style, and characters who oppose augmentations generally dress in modern plainclothes. The final boss battle of the game pits us against Hyron, who was being merged with Zhao. At the broadcast center for the signal, we're contacted by Eliza. She tells us that we have multiple options for a choice here. We have 4 different options. We can broadcast Darrow's signal, confessing about Augs and the Illuminati. This will cause augmentation to be permanently banned. We can blame Humanity Front for the attack, which will cause augments to be further developed. We can blame the events on tainted neuropozyne, which will cause augmentations to have tight regulations moving forward. Or we can destroy the facility and let humanity choose the truth for themselves. There are slight variations on each of these endings as well. This is determined by how we chose to play the game, whether we were more violent or more passive throughout the course of our playthrough. The post-credit scene shows Bob Page talking to Morgan Everett about Morpheus, the AI that we found in the first game. Megan Reed is revealed to be working for Page on a virus. It's also hinted that Jensen's DNA will be used to begin the project that will create the Dentons, that he is the precursor to everything. I do enjoy the story overall for Human Revolution. Its themes are incredibly interesting. Obviously, the game is fueled by the idea of transhumanism. Are these mechanical augmentations ethical? Should humans stay pure and not accept any sort of mechanical alterings to our human form? You could even make the argument that we are already augmented, that phones and computers are just augments for our brain. Sure, they're slow, but since most knowledge is available through the clicks of some keys, there's surely something to be said about it. The morality of forced augmentations is also explored quite a bit in the game as well. This is a future that I could completely see happening. People forced into getting different augmentations for their careers or just their lives. This is another parallel to the modern day with things like cell phones. You can't exist in the world today without a phone or a computer. It's just not possible, at least not well. This is a sort of societal pressure forcing technology on the masses. The same would be true for things like augmentations, and this would become an especially complicated conversation when things like neuropozyne get involved. We also have the underlying themes of information control. The AI that controls the Picus News network exemplifies this. It controls information and redirects the thoughts of the public. On top of that, at the end of the game, we're given the choice to obscure the truth from the public. Our first reaction to changing the public's opinion on something through lies might be that it's an awful thing to do, but based on your decision, your opinion on this could change once it's presented with your choices for an ending. The game does this pretty well in most cases, present you with difficult and complicated, nuanced topics in a black and white manner, and then present them in a way that forces you to look at the gray. This again exemplifies the things that Deus Ex tried to do all those years ago. There are some downsides to the story, like the ending itself. There's some variety here in the presentation, like the morality endings, but it's not really that much different. It's really just 4 endings with some slightly different dialogue. There's also the fact that we choose the ending by pressing one of 4 buttons. The endings we get after pressing these buttons are just really odd, mostly real-life footage as well, which just seems like a really weird stylistic choice at the end of the game. Especially when Deus Ex's world is so incredibly stylized itself, putting real-life footage of our world into the game to illustrate what happens to their world doesn't really seem to fit. Deus Ex Human Revolution is a straightening of the track for the series. It puts these games back on the path that they were meant to be on, making interesting games that are fun to play, that put player choice at the forefront, all while giving us interesting moral and ethical dilemmas to think about. Playing Human Revolution surely does feel like a modernized version of Deus Ex. Sure, there are some downsides to this, mostly because it's a modernized version of Deus Ex. It definitely doesn't feel as cool, gonzo, soulful, or interesting as the first game in the series. There's been something sapped out of this product with a turkey baster, but in my opinion, Deus Ex is one of the best games ever, and you can't exactly directly compare every game to the best game ever. I also think that aesthetics could be a matter of preference. Human Revolution could be a game full of soul to someone, just not me. In the end, when playing it, this game does feel like it holds true to the core values of the series, though. We're given choices and variety when approaching situations. We're allowed to take on enemies and missions the way that we want. We're once again back to a place where each experience with the game can come out feeling truly our own. On top of that, we're back to a situation where the game feels like we can do some fun things with it. We can experiment, we can try stuff out, we can at least attempt to get out of that simulation. The story itself is, again, incredibly interesting. The themes presented get your mind rushing with interesting thoughts. A good story will make you want to argue your own opinion on it. Sure, the endings themselves are pretty tacked on, but that only makes up a small percentage of the story that this game tells. But I have to be honest, a bad ending can make a journey feel quite pointless. With a good ending, this game could have had a story that was truly something great. The new visual style and direction that the series takes overall is incredibly interesting. It sure is a massive step up from Invisible War. That game felt like a downgrade in most ways, and this game surely feels like an upgrade in most ways. Human Revolution was a critical success. The game had fantastic reviews from most outlets. Most praised the visuals and the story itself. Most also criticized the boss battles and level design repetition towards the end of the game. The game sold very well too. By November 2011, it had sold 2.18 million copies in North America and Europe alone. Most of the sales for the game were on Xbox 360. Square Enix would post triple its expected profits from April to September, making the release a favorable result. Originally, a sequel to Human Revolution wasn't planned, but with the success of the game, the studio knew that they had to make one. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad.